Unhealed educators shape learning spaces. Here is something they never told you in teacher training. Your unhealed wounds don't stay at home when you walk into the classroom. They follow you and your students feel them. I know that's uncomfortable to hear. Trust me, it was uncomfortable to leave. Today we're talking about one of the most important and most avoided truths in education. You cannot teach what you have not healed. And before you close this video thinking I'm blaming teachers, please stay with me. I am also a teacher because this is actually the most compassionate conversation we can have about why teaching feels so hard, while our classrooms feel so tense, and why both educators and students are burning out at record rates. If you have ever snapped at a student and didn't know why, if you've graded papers with resentment instead of care, if you've noticed yourself becoming the kind of teacher you never wanted to be, this one is for you. So welcome to the Learning Associate Networks, where we partner with schools and teachers in instructional coaching, edtech solutions, research, and policy advisory service. Let me introduce you to a term you need to know: emotional leakage. It's what happens when your unprocessed emotions, unhealed traumas, and unresolved stress seep into our professional interactions, often without us even realizing it. You see it when a teacher who grew up with harsh criticism unconsciously uses sarcasm to motivate students. An educator who was shamed for being too sensitive dismisses students' needs. Someone who never felt good enough projects impossible standards onto their class. Students don't just learn your content, they absorb your emotional state. I want you to think about that. You can have the best lesson plan in the world, but if you're teaching from a place of depletion, resentment, or fear, that's what will fill the room. Not your PowerPoint, not your curriculum, not your content, your unregulated nervous system. This is what breaks my heart. Most educators don't even know what is happening. You're not trying to hurt students, you are trying to survive. You're dealing with systemic pressures that treat you like a machine, administrative demands that ignore your humanity, a profession that expects you to pour from an empty cup. But here's the truth: survival mode is contagious, and our students are catching it. When you teach from burnout, students learn that exhaustion is normal. When you teach from perfection, they internalize that mistakes are failures. When you teach from your own academic trauma, you risk creating it in them. Now, let's get specific, because trauma doesn't just leak, it shapes how we discipline our students and how we assess them. Let's talk about discipline first. Notice how you respond when a student challenges your authority, when they don't follow directions, when they question your grading, or when they show any form of disrespect. You maybe grew up in an environment where obedience was demanded, not earned. Questions were seen as defiance. Control equaled safety. See, because of that, you might be disciplined student to soothe your own triggered nervous system, not to actually teach them. I'm not saying boundaries don't. What I'm saying here is that when discipline becomes about our need for control rather than the student's need for guidance, we have actually crossed the line. Now, let's talk about assessment. This is where it gets really uncomfortable. How you were assessed as a student directly impacts how you assess as a teacher. So let's give an example. If you were shamed for wrong answers, you might avoid giving critical feedback. If you were praised only for perfection, you might grade with impossible standards. If you were compared to others constantly, you might create a competitive environment rather than a collaborative one. If you were reduced to a number, maybe you were just reduced to your grades, you might struggle to see students beyond their GPA. We don't just teach students, we teach our relationship with learning, and that relationship was formed in our own trauma. I want you to think about this. The teacher who grades punitively because they were never shown grace. The educator who can't give extensions because they were taught that struggle equals weakness. The instructor whose feedback is overly harsh because kindness wasn't modeled for them. The professor who can't handle students' emotion because their own were never validated. And here's what students experience: inconsistent responses that confuse them, emotional volatility that scares them, Standards that feel arbitrary because they are actually about your wounds, not their learning. Classroom that feels unsafe because you don't feel safe. Hurt people don't just hurt people. Hurt educators unintentionally hurt their learners. So, what's the alternative? Teaching from a regulated place. And no, this is not about some wellness talk or wellness trend. This is professional competency. This is pedagogical responsibility. Teaching from regulation means that you have done your own healing work. You can separate student behavior from your triggers. You can respond instead of react, and your nervous system is not running the classroom. The most important work you do as an instructor or as an educator happens before you even enter the classroom. It is the work you do on yourself. Okay? So regulated teaching looks like, number one, noticing when you are activated and pausing before you respond. Recognizing that a student's challenge isn't a threat to your worth. Being able to hold space for emotions, both your own and your students. Creating boundaries that protect everyone, not yours only. Giving feedback that is honest and kind because you received both. And the beautiful thing is that when you teach from healing, students don't just learn content. They learn that growth is possible, that mistakes do not define you, and that humans can be both imperfect and worthy. Your regulated presence becomes the curriculum underneath the curriculum. Now, I know you might be thinking, this sounds great, but how? How do I even begin to heal while I am drowning in lesson plans and grading? That is exactly why we have created our course, Healing from Academic Trauma for Educators. This is not just another professional development course that adds to your to-do list. This is an invitation to finally address what is underneath the burnout, the frustration, the feeling that you are failing even when you're trying so hard. In this course, you're going to explore how to identify your own academic trauma and its classroom impact, tools to regulate your nervous system in real time, ways to break cycles of harming without breaking yourself, how to create healing-centered discipline and assessment practices, strategies to teach from wholeness instead of wounds. Because healing itself is not self-indulgent. For educators, healing is professional development at its deepest level. Let's talk about something again that is very radical. Healing is leadership. I say that again. Healing is leadership. When you do your healing work as an educator, you are not just helping yourself. You are modeling emotional intelligence for your students. You're breaking generational cycles of academic trauma. You're creating a classroom where learning feels safe. You're demonstrating that growth includes tending to wounds, and that you're leading a cultural shift in education. The bravest thing an educator can do is to admit that they are human and then do something about it. Because what happens when an educator heals is amazing. Students in those classrooms report feeling that they are more engaged, not because the content changed, but because the energy did. They are safer to take risks because failure is not met with judgment. They are seen as whole people, not just test scores. They are hopeful about learning because their teacher models hope. And educators report that there's less burnout because they are not fighting themselves anymore. They feel more joy in teaching because healing creates space for passion. They have stronger relationship with students because connection replaces control. And there's professional renewal because they remember why they started in the first place. So you became an educator to help others grow, but you can't lead anyone further than you have gone yourself. So here's my invitation to you. If you're an educator who is tired of reacting instead of responding, if you've noticed patterns in your teaching that you don't like, but don't know how to change it, if you want to create classrooms that heal instead of harm, you don't have to do that alone. We have created a safe space specifically for educators, teachers, professors, lecturers, instructors, coaches, to connect, grow, and be refreshed. A community where your struggles are met with understanding and not judgment. Healing is seen as strength, not weakness. You can be honest about the cost of unhealed teaching. You are supported in becoming the educator you really want to be. The students don't need perfect teachers. They need healed ones. So the link to join our community is in the comment section below. You are invited to stop teaching from wounds, to start teaching from wisdom, to join educators who are committed to healing as professional practice, and to have access to resources, support, and transformative materials that will transform your teaching from inside out. You cannot pour from an empty cup, but you also cannot pour what you haven't purified. So join us, let us heal together, not just for ourselves, but for every student who will benefit from our wholeness. The link is waiting, the community is ready. The classroom you dream of starts with the healing you commit to. Remember, healing yourself is not selfish. It is the most generous gift you can give your student. See you in the community.